My unfaithful wife believed she could conceal her affair, but I disrupted her plans by crashing one of her dates and serving her divorce papers. Most men discover their wife's infidelity by returning home unexpectedly, overhearing suspicious conversations, or uncovering evidence. In my case, it was much simpler. My wife unintentionally emailed me. It appeared her email program suggested my name, and she selected it without checking, a common mistake when in a hurry. After 18 years of marriage, I was surprised to receive an email from her titled About Yesterday. Since yesterday had been an ordinary Wednesday, I couldn't understand why Anne would need to email me about it. Reading the message, I saw she described how amazing yesterday had been and how much she looked forward to next week. She even referred to herself as your lady. I had been at work all day Wednesday, and as far as I knew, so had Anne. We hadn't even spoken on the phone. Her unusually cheerful attitude when she got home suddenly took on a new meaning, and the betrayal was clear. At first, I thought about confronting her that evening to demand an explanation or confession. But logically, I realized she might deny the letter's implications, come up with an alternative explanation, or even dismiss it as a joke. My accusations without proof could lead nowhere. Instead, I decided to wait and see if Anne noticed her mistake and confessed. If she didn't, her carelessness had already warned me and might help me gather more information about her next date. Since Anne is in real estate, her schedule is irregular. That night, she came home much later than I did. I paid close attention to her, but her behavior seemed perfectly normal. If she realized the email had gone to me, she didn't show any signs. I also didn't let on that I suspected anything. The evening went by as usual, but I couldn't sleep. I spent the night analyzing the situation. There could, theoretically, be an innocent explanation, and acting impulsively might destroy our marriage. I loved Anne, but if the letter indicated an affair, I needed to act. The next morning, I resumed analyzing and contacted a private investigator to follow her. If Wednesday's events were innocent, it wouldn't completely erase my fears, but it would give me some peace of mind. If my suspicions were correct, I'd uncover the truth and be able to respond accordingly. After taking this step, I set the matter aside and returned to work, trying to focus. The following Wednesday seemed normal. Anne and I both left for work and returned home late. Nothing about her appearance or behavior seemed off. I sat in my office, reading stories online while trying to hide my anxiety. By Thursday, I met with the private investigator. Though not an overly emotional person, I could sense the weight of the moment. The investigator confirmed my suspicions with photos. Anne had been seen entering and leaving a motel near the airport, hand in hand with a man. The betrayal was undeniable. I thought for a moment before asking the investigator for further help. If the motel was their regular meeting place, I wanted photos of what happened inside the room. The investigator explained this would require paying the motel manager for cooperation. I agreed, and he assured me of results. Back in my office, I found it impossible to concentrate. With my doubts confirmed, my ability to think clearly disappeared. I abandoned work entirely and focused on planning my next steps. In addition to confirming Anne's infidelity, I figured out why she had accidentally sent the email to me. Her lover was our neighbor, Mark Bradshaw. The email program must have suggested my name, MC Bishop, because it was similar. It seemed careless not to double check. But I realized emotions often cloud lovers' judgment. Knowing Mark was involved deepened my sense of betrayal. Mark and his wife, Bobby, were our close friends. We frequently had meals together and went to the movies. I had never noticed any signs of an affair. Was I blind, or were they just that skilled at hiding it? The question of what to do next tormented me. I spent hours considering various options, from revenge fantasies to pleading with Anne not to leave. Questions about how long the affair had lasted and why it had started consumed me. My emotions swung between anger and self-pity. Finally, I devised a plan. My strategy involved two parts: separating the lovers and winning Anne's heart back. The initial phase of my plan focused on driving a wedge between them, while the second was a determined effort to win Anne back by embodying the ideal husband. My strategy was to highlight the flaws in her relationship with Mark while showcasing the benefits of returning to me. I made detailed notes outlining steps, planning timing, and analyzing their interdependencies. A critical component was ensuring they remained unaware of my knowledge. It demanded restraint, but I believed I could handle it. I decided to wait for another report from the detective agency before acting, but I started preparing. First, I purchased a system to record calls on our home phone and a voice-activated device hidden in Anne's car. Tapping the home phone eliminated that communication channel. While I couldn't monitor her mobile, I suspected her car was where she'd call Mark. I wasn't concerned about her making calls at work since private conversations there seemed unlikely. My next move was accessing Anne's email account. Her work email was linked to her home computer, and though it was password protected, I knew where she stored her passwords. It didn't take long to gain access, and I arranged for all her messages to be forwarded to me. The affair appeared to be in its early stages, so my goal was to end it as soon as possible. Soon, I received the detective's update. Not only did they provide photos of Anne and Mark's next meeting, but they also included video and audio evidence. Watching their interaction was painful as it revealed a tenderness and emotional connection that stung deeply. This display of intimacy made me question whether my plan could truly succeed. Nonetheless, with nothing left to lose, I resolved to continue. Anne's impatience and dislike of disappointment became focal points of my strategy. I aimed to exploit these traits to disrupt her bond with Mark. Additionally, her romantic nature offered opportunities for another aspect of my plan. Having access to all her emails gave me a significant advantage in planning. Their next email exchange gave me the details I needed to initiate the first stage. Anne wrote, "Mark, are we still on for Wednesday?" To which he replied, "Absolutely. Same time, same place. I can't wait." On the day of their date, I drove to Anne's office and parked discreetly. After she returned from lunch, I casually walked by her car, ensured no one was around, and quickly unscrewed the valve cover on her tire, letting the air escape. I then drove home, reflecting on how she'd managed without transportation at work. Sure enough, about 20 minutes before her scheduled meeting with Mark, Anne called me for help. I reassured her not to worry and mentioned that I had a light workload and could fix her car. I told her I just needed to finish something first and deliberately waited 15 extra minutes before leaving. When I arrived, Anne was waiting by her car, visibly frustrated. I apologized for the delay, explaining that my task had taken longer than expected. As she paced impatiently, I slowly and deliberately changed her tire, strategically parking my car behind hers to prevent her from leaving until I was finished. By the time I replaced the tire, loaded the flat into her trunk, and washed my hands, more than an hour had passed since she was supposed to meet Mark. I apologized again, expressing hope that the delay wouldn't harm her meeting with a client. She resignedly replied that he would just have to understand. During the tire change, Anne's phone rang multiple times, but she ignored it, likely avoiding a conversation with Mark in my presence. Back at my office, I checked her emails and saw their exchange. Mark expressed frustration about waiting at the motel for over an hour, blaming the flat tire. I thought, good, knowing I had disrupted their plans. That evening, after dinner, I took Anne to the sofa, placed her feet on my lap, and gave her a foot massage. I told her I understood she'd had a stressful day and wanted to do something kind for her. At first, she was skeptical of my motives, but she soon relaxed and smiled as I continued. Throughout the week, I waited for the right moment to take the next step. I told her I'd been inspired while thinking about how much I valued her love and how difficult things could be if she had a flat tire on the highway. Anne scrutinized me for a moment, but then hugged me tightly, saying, "That's so sweet, darling. It means so much to me." I wondered if she felt any guilt. Later, through her emails, I learned she and Mark were planning another special meeting in a few days. This time, I decided it would be too suspicious to interfere with her car again. Instead, I followed her discreetly. After she entered the room Mark had booked at the motel, I circled to the back of the building and went inside through a side door. The motel was modest, with no security cameras. I activated the fire alarm in the hallway, then waited outside until the guests evacuated to the parking lot. Anne and Mark were nowhere in sight, but I assumed they were among the evacuated guests, likely fuming with frustration. Back at my office, I gleefully watched the emails exchanged between the disgruntled pair. Anne vented, "I'm so furious I could scream." To which Mark replied apologetically, "I'm sorry, but this wasn't my fault." Anne retorted, "Next time, pick a place that isn't a fire hazard." Her tone was unmistakable. When she came home from work, I noticed she still seemed on edge. However, her mood shifted from agitation to surprise when she saw the dining table elegantly set with fine china and linen napkins. The aroma of her favorite meal cooking filled the air, and she looked at me with mock disbelief. Though a fleeting look of fear crossed her face, she quickly composed herself, thanking me warmly and saying, "That's so sweet of you, darling. You're so thoughtful." After dinner, I insisted she leave the dishes to me and escorted her to the sofa before turning on one of my favorite shows. Despite any doubts Anne may have had about her affair, Mark's next email revealed he wasn't giving up. He expressed eagerness for another meeting and promised to make it even more memorable. Reading his message, I cursed his persistence and lamented Anne's willingness to continue. It was clear I needed to escalate my efforts. The day before their planned meeting, I called the Hyatt Hotel at noon, posing as Mark Bradshaw, and canceled the reservation he had made. The clerk thanked me, mentioning that the cancellation was timely due to a large conference. Feeling confident, I decided to observe how events would unfold. At the Hyatt, I positioned myself in view of the reception desk, concealed behind a newspaper. Soon, Anne and Mark arrived, appearing affectionate and engrossed in conversation. Their mood darkened quickly when they discovered no room was available. Mark protested, insisting he had booked in advance, but the clerk explained that the reservation had been canceled. Frustrated, Mark tried to secure another room, only to learn the hotel was fully booked. Anne, visibly upset, urged him to leave, and he reluctantly followed her to the parking lot, attempting to soothe her frustration. Watching them drive off separately, I thought with satisfaction, mission accomplished. When Anne returned home, I met her at the door and told her we were heading out. Before she could protest, I guided her to my car, opened the door for her, and got behind the wheel. She asked where we were going, and I replied with a smile that I had planned a little surprise for the evening. Turning on some soft music, I drove in silence while she studied me curiously, trying to guess my intentions. Her concern grew when we arrived at the Hyatt, and she asked why we were there. I simply winked and told her she would soon find out. We took the elevator to the rooftop restaurant, famous for its revolving dome and city views. While Anne didn't comment, I knew my success stood in stark contrast to Mark's failure. As we settled in, I mentioned I had pre-ordered for us, and she thanked me, expressing her appreciation. When the waiter brought a bucket of ice with a chilled bottle of champagne, her mood visibly brightened. After a toast, her delight grew when oysters on the half shell were served. I silently noted that I wasn't fond of oysters, but knew they were her favorite. For the main course, the waiter presented a salmon niçoise salad with black olive sauce. Anne remarked, smiling, that she had expected something heavy like steak. I reassured her that the salad was perfect since she loved lighter meals, and besides, we didn't want to overeat. She gave me a questioning look, but didn't press further. For dessert, we enjoyed fresh raspberries topped with whipped cream and glasses of Grand Marnier. Anne thoroughly enjoyed the meal, and on the way home, unbuckled her seatbelt to snuggle close to me. The combination of drinks and oysters seemed to have worked as intended. Sensing her mix of emotions, likely frustration from her ruined plans and excitement from the evening, I led her straight upstairs to our bedroom. I suggested she change into something comfortable, while I attended to a few things. As she turned to her closet, I quickly checked the guest bedroom to ensure everything was set. Returning, I was pleased to see she had chosen a sheer black nightgown that revealed her curves enticingly. I guided her to the guest bedroom, where candles flickered around the bed. I told her we would focus on touch and scent that night. Placing a sleep mask over her eyes, I led her to the bed, undressing her carefully before laying her on fresh linen sheets. Wafting the scent of almond butter under her nose, I began with a foot massage, gradually working my way up to her shoulders and back. Her soft moans of pleasure reassured me. And as the evening progressed, we shared a moment of intimacy that left us both breathless. Afterward, I carried her to our bedroom, covered her with a sheet, and watched her drift into a deep sleep. Following a quick sponge bath, I returned to bed, satisfied with how the night had unfolded. The next morning, Anne surprised me by waking early and preparing coffee and breakfast. Her eyes sparkled as she thanked me for the previous evening. I smiled and told her I was glad she enjoyed it, adding that I would cherish the memory for a long time. Later that day, I intercepted an email confirming that Mark was still trying to plan a meeting with Anne. He apologized for the Hyatt hotel mishap, expressing confusion over the canceled reservation. Anne replied, hinting that perhaps it wasn't meant to happen. Mark, unwilling to give up, proposed spending Saturday at their lake house since Bobby would be out of town. He promised there'd be no booking issues, no alarms, just an intimate time together, signing off with love. Mark, aware that I usually played golf on Saturdays, suggested they meet while I was out. His eagerness to see Anne again made it clear my plan had reached a pivotal moment. The strategy of divide and rule was working, but their new plans threatened my progress. On Friday night, I subtly swapped Anne's phone battery with a dead one. If she tried calling Mark over the weekend, it would have to be on the home phone, allowing me to record the conversation. On Saturdays, Anne and I typically dressed casually, but when she came downstairs in a stylish skirt and blouse, I took note. As my usual golf departure time approached, Anne watched me with a hint of anxiety, likely because I hadn't changed into my golf attire. By 10 a.m., when I still showed no intention of leaving, it was clear she was preparing an excuse to head out. Growing impatient, she finally asked if I was playing golf. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Anne opened the door to find her sister, Miriam, whom I had invited for the weekend. Anne was surprised but happy to see Miriam. They hugged warmly, and Miriam explained that I'd invited her earlier in the week since she had no plans. Although Anne and Miriam were close, they didn't see each other often due to the distance. Anne seemed delighted by the unexpected visit and realized why I hadn't gone to play golf. She appreciated the gesture. Inviting Miriam to join us for breakfast, I jokingly suggested she might want to dress up a bit more, though she looked great in her casual outfit. Anne blushed, but quickly recovered. As I helped Miriam carry her bag to the guest room, Anne mentioned needing to make a call. A few moments later, I heard muffled frustration. When she returned holding her phone, she complained about the battery being dead. I sympathized, suggesting she use the home phone, but she brushed it off, saying the call wasn't important. She then asked where we should have breakfast. Over the weekend, I spent time bonding with the sisters, doing my best to uplift their spirits. On Sunday afternoon, as Miriam was preparing to leave, she hugged me, expressing gratitude. Intentionally, she remarked to Anne, "You have such a special husband." Anne winced slightly but smiled, hugging me as if to acknowledge the comment. I suspected Anne had still managed to contact Mark, but since it would have been on the home phone, I wasn't worried. I had the recording. After Anne went to bed Sunday night, I checked the recording and confirmed my suspicion. Early that morning, Anne had called Mark, explaining her sister's unexpected visit and why their meeting couldn't happen. Their disappointment was evident, and I felt I had delivered a significant blow to their relationship. On Monday, their emails confirmed my success. Mark wrote, "Are we still meeting this week?" To which Anne responded, "I don't think so, Mark. This is getting too complicated, and it's starting to annoy me. Besides, Mac has been really sweet to me lately, and I feel so guilty sneaking around behind his back. I think we should end this." Mark pleaded, "Don't say that, Anne. At least one more time." But Anne was firm. "No, I'm serious. It's over." Resigned, Mark replied, "Well, I can't say I'm not disappointed. You're still a beautiful woman, but maybe it's for the best. I don't want to lose Bobby either. I hope we can stay friends." Anne reassured him, "Of course, but just as friends without benefits." Their relationship had crumbled under the weight of the obstacles I'd created. I felt triumphant, knowing I had achieved the first phase of my plan. Now, I needed to focus on the second. When Annie came home that evening, she appeared distracted and downcast, her eyes occasionally betraying signs of tears. Not wanting to push too hard, but feeling the need to acknowledge her mood, I asked gently if everything was okay, or if she was dealing with work issues. Avoiding eye contact, she replied vaguely, "It's fine. I'm just in a bad mood, I guess." I nodded, giving her space, but inside I was certain she was mourning the end of her affair with Mark, even though she had chosen to end it. Knowing Anne's emotional nature, I understood she was struggling with the loss, even as her mood began to settle. I couldn't help but imagine Mark's reaction, likely much less introspective. Sarcastically, I thought, he's probably cozying up to Bobby by now. The next morning, Anne seemed much brighter. Throughout the day, I didn't come across any messages between her and Mark, which reassured me that their decision to part ways was final. That evening, as Anne entered the study, I sat with an Edgar Allan Poe book in my lap, ready to set the next phase of my plan into motion. When Anne asked about the book I was reading and its story, I told her it was one of my favorites, The Cask of Amontillado. She admitted she wasn't familiar with it and then cuddled up next to me, momentarily interrupting my reading to express her appreciation. Looking into my eyes, she said earnestly, "You've been so good to me these past weeks. I feel incredibly lucky to have you." Her words of gratitude filled me with a deep sense of triumph. I knew I had achieved my goal. I looked back at her, waiting for her to continue. For a brief moment, guilt flickered across her face, and her eyes became watery. With fervor, she added, "I really don't deserve you." Keeping my composure, I replied calmly, "No, I don't deserve you." Then I reached for the desk drawer. Without further comment, I tossed a stack of photos into her lap, pictures of her and Mark at the motel. At first, she seemed puzzled by the sudden shift in my tone. She picked up the photos, and as their meaning sank in, she gasped in horror. "Oh my God, no, no!" she wailed. Next, I handed her a copy of the divorce application my lawyer had filed earlier that day. She stared at it, her breath hitching, and stammered, "But I thought isn't there any way?" "No," I interrupted icily, sliding another set of documents toward her. "If you're curious about Mark, here's a copy of the letter I sent to Bobby tonight, along with the detective's report." Her eyes widened as I added, "I also sent a similar letter to your sister Miriam, explaining why I'm divorcing you." Anne's reaction was a mix of pain and disbelief. She moaned, tears streaming down her face, and sobbed, "I don't understand. You've been so kind and loving these past few weeks. How can you be so heartless now? Doesn't all of that mean anything?" Maintaining a steady tone, I replied, "My dear, when you began your little affair, you ended my love for you. These past weeks, they weren't about love. They were about ending your relationship with Mark. I wanted you to fully grasp what you were losing when you betrayed me. My goal was to take away from you the same thing you took from me. From what I can see, my plan succeeded." Overcome with emotion, Anne collapsed onto the sofa, weeping uncontrollably. Before leaving, I placed the Poe book I had been reading atop the pile of documents. The page was still open to the Cask of Amontillado, and I used a marker to highlight the Montresor family motto, "Nemo me impune lacessit." No one insults me with impunity.